this episode I'm going to talk about skepticism and subjectivism. And the first topic that I'll investigate will be moral nihilism. So in a nutshell, moral nihilism is the view that there is no such thing as morality. As the name suggests, it's a nihilist position. It's a position that doesn't believe in values, in the existence of values. This belief holds that there is no such thing as morality. There are no moral rules. Remember that cultural relativism holds that different cultures have different moral codes. And it takes someone just one step beyond cultural relativism to say that these moral codes are mere traditions. The moral codes that different cultures are holding are mere traditions, and these traditions are arbitrary and not necessarily true in any philosophical sense. So when you say this, when you take this step, it might imply that there is no such thing as morality. Each culture, if you accept that moral relativism is true, if you accept the power of some plausible version of moral relativism, it takes you just one step beyond it to say that, okay, it might be true that different cultures hold different moral views, it's a plausible view, but these moral codes that different cultures are holding are mere traditions. And these are just arbitrary from a philosophical point of view. And thus, there is no such thing as morality, because these are mere traditions, and this plausible view just leads us to moral nihilism. This is a one step to get to moral nihilism. It's important to note that a moral nihilist need not be a moral egoist. So in the sense that a person who is a moral nihilist need not do whatever is in their self-interest. A moral egoist is someone who only does in line with moral duty whatever is in their self-interest. And this is different than moral nihilism. A moral nihilist does not have to be a moral egoist. Just make this distinction very clear in your minds. A moral nihilist just doesn't believe in the truth of any moral code. Probably a good example of a moral nihilist is Thrasymachus in Plato's famous dialogue, The Republic. Famous book, The Republic. In this book, Thrasymachus claims that justice is to the advantage of the stronger. So whatever is to the advantage of the stronger, whatever moral code or whatever type of behavior is advantageous for the stronger is just in the language that Plato is using, or we can also say is morally right. So whatever is advantageous for the stronger is morally right, according to Thrasymachus. This might be true for legal code, because you might believe that in some despotic regimes or overly authoritarian regimes, a legal code might be to the advantage of the stronger classes or stronger parties, or even in some cases to the advantage of one single person, right? So this might be true that what's right from a legal point might be to the advantage of stronger, as Thrasymachus might want to claim. But he wants to say more than this. Thrasymachus in Plato's Dialogue Republic says that morality is to the advantage of stronger, not only legal code. And this sounds a bit controversial to say for morality. We can say this for legal code, as I've been trying to explain, but for moral code it's kind of controversial. And one famous philosopher who finds this view controversial and actually who defends something on the exact opposite side is Friedrich Nietzsche, famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche claims that morality, and in particular concepts good and evil, are made up by the weak rather than the strong to protect themselves against the strong. So Thrasymachus in Plato's dialogue was saying that morality is the code that's given out by the stronger. It's to the advantage of the stronger. And Nietzsche is just holding the opposite view. Nietzsche is saying that actual moral codes, especially the concepts good and evil, are made up by the weak to protect themselves against the stronger. So this is just the opposite view, and it's defended as strongly by the Nietzsche, as strongly as Thrasymachus is defending his own views. Nietzsche, in a couple of his books, criticized the prevalent Judeo-Christian moral values and called these values slave morality. But we cannot consider Nietzsche nihilist. Some authors and some philosophers, some commentators might think that Nietzsche is a nihilist, and famously said that he's a nihilist. But I don't think, and many other philosophers do not think, that Nietzsche is a nihilist, because he advocates for other values against the values that he calls values of slave morality, and we might call them master morality. So neither Thrasymachus nor Nietzsche are holding strong views that we might want to call moral nihilist positions. These were just two possible examples for moral nihilism. I'm trying to say that these examples do not really work in favor of moral nihilism. Moral nihilism also has to claim that no ethical view is better justified philosophically than others. And this is clearly wrong. For example, take the claim, people with certain skin color are inferior to certain others. If someone is a moral nihilist, they have to say that this claim is no weaker from a philosophical point of view than other moral claims. But it's not true, because look at this claim, which is actually clearly better justified. All people, irrespective of their skin color, are alike from morally relevant respects like self-awareness, ability to reason, and or capacity to suffer. So you can see, if some moral values or if some moral claims or moral arguments are better defensible than others, then it's difficult to say that there are no moral values, because better justification is one way to reach truth from an epistemological point of view. And if some views are better justified, then we can say that there is at least one evidence towards saying that there are some moral truths. And I'll come back to this later. But before going further, let me just sum up what I've been saying here about moral nihilism. I've just said that for a moral nihilist, there is no such thing as morality. There are no moral rules. And it might take one step beyond from cultural relativism to reach this view. I tried to give two examples, Thrasymachus and Nietzsche, and then admitted that Thrasymachus' view is not easy to grasp, is not easy to accept. But on the other hand, Nietzsche's view is not clearly a nihilist view. So these two examples are not great examples for a moral nihilist. And on the other hand, moral nihilism, or a moral nihilist, has to advocate that no moral argument is better justified than any other argument, which is clearly wrong. Let me come to individual subjectivism and try to explain this view. Remember that one of the criticisms of this idea, of the idea of cultural relativism, was based on the presence of opposing view on morality even in a given culture. So we were saying that when we were discussing cultural relativism, we were saying that, so even if we accept that there is a culturally accepted moral truth, we would have difficulty, or we would have to do some further work to explain differences in view in a certain culture. How do we explain these differences if one culture has the right moral code? And this criticism or this objection might lead one to think that the basis of morality is not a culture, but rather individual. And hence this brings us to the idea of individual subjectivism, which is the view that holds that moral truth lies at the individual level. Each person holds their version of moral truth. But to say that each person holds a version of the truth implies that moral disputes are no different than declaration of different tastes. For example, if I like football better than basketball and my friend likes basketball better than football, there's not much to discuss. We can have a good discussion about these topics, but in the end we might come to the point to say that, okay, these are just difference in tastes. And once we settle the difference in our tastes, there is not much further to discuss. We just can depart in peace. And the question is, can we say the same for moral disputes? If morality is based on an individual level, if moral truth actually is based on an individual level, it might be no difference than differences in taste, and it might be difficult to accept this idea. It's not easy to accept that there is moral truth, but disputes on it are not much different than the differences of taste. As you can see, individual subjectivism is different than moral nihilism. In moral nihilism, one has to hold that there are no moral truths. There is no moral truth. There are no moral codes that we might philosophically justify. On the other hand, individual subjectivist says that there is some sort of moral truth, but it's on the individual level. Each individual has their own version of moral truth. But if we are having any conversation of moral truth, it's very difficult to say that there is moral dispute, but this dispute is no different than differences in taste. Like I like football and my friend likes basketball better than football. right? So this is again quite controversial from an intuitive point of view. At this point, I would like to talk a little bit about expressivism, the view that's called expressivism. So this is the view that moral judgments are mere expressions of how the person making the judgments feels and wishes others felt the same way. For example, when I say racism is wrong, according to expressivism, I'm merely conveying my feelings on racist behavior and calling on others to feel the same way. But this is again controversial. When I make this comment, when I say racism is wrong, I take myself to be making a comment on racist actions and not merely how I feel about them, right? But according to expressivism, I was supposed to just make comments on how I'm feeling about racist behaviors, but I take myself to be talking about racism itself or racist behavior itself rather than my own feelings when I say racism is wrong. To say the opposite would be an arrogant position on finding out what my actual intentions are. To say that no, you are still expressing what your feelings are, although you think that you're expressing something about outside your own feelings. I think this would be an arrogant position, and this would be analyzing what I'm actually intending to say rather than believing in what I'm saying about my intentions of what I'm trying to express. So I think expressivism on that point is a controversial view. So let's come to moral objectivism. I've been saying that moral nihilist position is intuitively difficult to defend. Individual subjectivism is controversial from an epistemological point of view. Expressivism is also philosophically arrogant position, and that's why it's controversial. And this brings me to moral objectivism, which is the view that in moral skepticism, which one version of which is moral nihilism, and individual subjectivism are opposing. According to moral objectivism, almost all cultures have words of praise for character, for instance. This is just one example that a person who is holding moral objectivism might give. So, according to this person who is holding the truth of moral objectivism would say, almost all cultures have words of praise for people's characters. For example, when you are trying to praise someone, you might say that they're a kind person, they're thoughtful, they're welcoming, hospitable, friendly, courageous, or brave, or whatever else you would like to say in praise of a person. So one might discuss the exact content of these concepts, but their utterance almost always shows moral approval. You see, so in each culture there are some words for praise. These might be different words. Of course, in different languages there will be different words, but the concepts, which is above the words themselves, for instance, kind in another language might have a different word, but the concept of kindness might refer to something very similar to each other. And the content might even change a little bit, but these are always words of moral approval. So in order to defend moral subjectivism, one has to show that someone can be called kind, or whatever in the word is replaced for it in another language, in a disapproving way. If you want to defend moral subjectivism, you have to show that kind can be used in a disapproving way. She is such a kind person. It's such a morally wrong thing. You have to be able to say this if you want to define moral subjectivism, right? But this is not quite easy. And kind is just an example. You can find another example, but the idea would be the same. And this is not quite easy. So if you believe that this is intuitively not quite easy, you will have to say that at least some of our moral values are objectively true. So I'm not, with this little 2-minute philosophical argument, I'm not saying that I have proven moral objectivism. I'm just giving an intuitive difficulty for moral subjectivism, and I'm saying that I'm providing one argumentative backup for moral objectivism. And this is, in the end, I'm saying that at least some of our moral values are objectively true if you are accepting the argument that I'm making here. So if moral objectivism has this sort of intuitive backup, and it's difficult for moral nihilism and moral individual subjectivism to be defensible from a philosophical point of view, why is there an appeal to ethical skepticism and subjectivism? I'll just now count 3 reasons or 3 types of appeals to moral skepticism, to ethical skepticism or moral skepticism and moral subjectivism, and give counter arguments to it. The first reason why there might be an appeal to moral skepticism or subjectivism is this. According to these views, each person decides for herself or himself which ethical beliefs to choose, and they are not imposed upon any moral values. So if you're a moral subjectivist, you can say that, okay, I have my own moral truth and I don't have to accept anybody else's. And this seems to be empowering from a point of view, right? I mean, you're not accepting any moral rules that are imposed upon you from outside, and you are saying that I can decide for myself which which behaviors or which type of policies are morally right and which are wrong. And this is one type of appeal for moral subjectivism or individual subjectivism or moral skepticism. But we do not advocate this idea when it comes to scientific beliefs, right? We do not say that the earth might be flat just because someone can choose to believe that it is so. Someone's belief doesn't make it true that the earth is flat from a scientific point of view. We use all sorts of scientific approaches to prove that the earth is not flat. The reason is some scientific claims are better justified. Some people might believe that the earth is flat and they might give their own justifications for it, either philosophical or scientific justifications, but it's clear that the earth is not flat because some scientific claims are better justified than others according to any plausible scientific method that you're advocating. And the same is true for ethical claims. So the justification method for science, of course, is different than the justification method for ethical beliefs or ethical declarations or ethical ideas, right? Science has its own methods of justification. Statistics or induction or all sorts of scientific approaches might be put into that box of more scientific justification. When we come to moral justification, we have philosophical arguments. Philosophical arguments have to be well argumented, well justified, consistent, and they have to respond to objections, right? And one might add other criteria. And same is true for ethical claims, whatever we were saying for scientific claims, which is some ethical claims, some moral claims are better justified than others. Hence, just because someone holds certain ethical views does not make those ethical views true. They have to be better justified than other views. So this is my objection against the first appeal for moral nihilism or individual subjectivism. The second appeal might hold that there is widespread disagreement on ethical issues, and that's why moral nihilism is a better position. This ethical disagreement, this widespread disagreement on ethical issues shows that there are no moral values, moral nihilism, or there are moral truth, but each person has an individual version of the moral truth. But there's also a significant amount of ethical agreement, as opposed to this appeal, or this argument that creates appeal to the moral nihilist position. There's also a significant amount of ethical agreement. For example, valuing human life, preferring pleasure or pain, having meaningful relationships, respect for the ancestors, or helping those in need, etc. I'm not saying that these are objectively true. These values that I've been counting are objectively true. I'm not saying that. But there is widespread ethical agreement on these. Because I'm trying to object the idea that there is widespread ethical disagreement. I'm giving concepts on which there is arguably widespread ethical agreement. These can be a starting point for universal ethical theory like human rights discourse. Right, and you can start from these positions that are widely agreed upon, and you can reach a universal ethical theory like human rights discourse. Also, we shouldn't confuse agreement with justification. There might be disagreement or agreement, but there still needs to be philosophical justification in order to talk about moral truth or moral rightness or wrongness. Disagreement does not necessarily entail that some arguments are not more justified. This is my objection to the second appeal to moral nihilism or individual subjectivism. The third appeal holds that one can never be certain about the correctness of her own ethical beliefs. So if you are saying that killing someone under certain circumstances is morally wrong, but I can never be certain about the correctness of your claim. This is what a moral nihilist might say, for instance. But this level of certainty is not even sought in science. We accept physical laws as they are certain, but what we have is only a very good justification, which is a scientific justification in that case. If this level of certainty is sought, a level of certainty that's above any justification, any scientific justification is sought, it will always disappoint us. And it's the same for ethical claims. Ethical claims are justified using numerous philosophical argumentative methods. We need to make ethical decisions. We cannot withhold them until we reach certainty. And we have to find out which ethical claims or beliefs are better justified. And when they are better justified, we can use them as the correct ethical ideas, beliefs, or policies, or correct policies. So this is my objection to the third appeal to individual subjectivism or moral nihilism. So let me sum up what I've been talking about in this episode. I've tried to explain very shortly what moral nihilist position and individual subjectivist position are, and I've tried to give some arguments against them. My arguments, as you have seen, were based on widespread intuitions. So I was using intuitions against these positions to say that these positions are not as strong as they look. So in this philosophical method, I'm not saying that these positions are wrong because the intuitions are on the objecting side. Intuitions are supporting the objecting side. I'm not saying that. And I cannot say that from a philosophical point of view. But I'm saying that intuitions and well-argumented philosophical arguments are showing that these positions which are moral nihilism and individual subjectivism, are not as strong as they actually look. I also talked very shortly about expressivism and tried to argue that it's an arrogant position. And I tried further to show that moral objectivist position is not as controversial as it might sound at first sight. Then I tried to object to three points of appeal for individual subjectivism and moral nihilism, and try to show that actually these positions are not as tenable as they might look. So this is the end of this episode.